Welcome to Thrive Deeper, the show based on the Thrive Bible reading guides. This is an ongoing conversation about God's Word with Thrive's author, Dr. Matthew Jacoby, and your host, DJ Payne.
G'day and welcome to episode 135 of your favourite Bible podcast, Thrive Deeper. It's your old mate DJ Payne, and on this episode I sit down with Dr. Matthew Jacoby, your friend and mine, and we make a run for it. Our goal this week is to get through the rest of the book of 1 Samuel. Can we do it? There's a lot to cover. It is the death of King Saul. Sadly, we say goodbye to Jonathan as well, but we say hello to a whole lot of new people around this aspiring King David. What's going to happen? Well, you're going to have to tune in to find out. Also, we have an incredible offer for you. If you love C.S. Lewis or you've always thought you wanted to start reading him, have I got the offer for you. Do not miss out on this one. All right, let's get into it. Thrive Deeper, episode 135. Matthew, there's no time for niceties. There's no time for, funny stories or anything at the beginning of this podcast because we have got the last 9 chapters of 1 Samuel to get through, right? So we have just got to drop everything, dump everything overboard that we don't need and just go.
Yeah, but I like that. It's that big picture stuff. I think that's the best way to do it.
I thought you meant you don't like all the niceties and the fun.
Oh, no, get rid of that. Yeah. No, that goes without saying. But I love big picture stuff. That's where, because I think when we read the Bible, we can get so drawn into the details. Yeah. We actually lose the role of the different stories in their context.
Yeah.
And that's the interpretation bit of understanding the Bible. It's like, okay, not just what is it saying, but what is this section doing?
Yeah. I love that. All right. Well, with that in mind, to give you up to speed, we're finishing off the book of 1 Samuel today. Now, we have been looking at the life, in the book of 1 Samuel, we have obviously 3 major characters. The last of the judges, which is the priest Samuel, warning, we'll be saying goodbye to him in this episode. Actually, we'll be saying goodbye to him and then a very brief cameo hello again.
Yeah,
in this one, a very weird thing to end in Samuel's life. We have the life of Saul, the first king of the united Israelite tribes, and then we have young King David, the next anointed king of the united Israelite tribes, and they're the 3 major characters that we have throughout this book. We're as I've just said, we're saying goodbye to Samuel. We've had the rise and fall of Saul, and we ended our last episode with one of Saul's most, probably the most atrocious thing that he did, which was the killing of the priests.
Yeah, terrible.
With his army.
And he slaughters the whole town.
Yes, it's awful.
Because he thinks they're conspiring with David.
Yeah.
So at this point in the story, we've got a virtually insane man that we're dealing with, an insane tyrant king.
Yeah, a tyrant king who has become jealous, afraid. God has left him. The Holy Spirit has left him, and this is the tragic fall of an incredibly tragic figure, King Saul. And we're going to finish that off in this chapter, and then also be tracking the rise of young David as he comes up. One last thing, this is around about 1,000 years before Christ.
Right. Good context.
And this period of these 9 chapters covering the young life of David, who's probably in his 20s, which is easy to forget sometimes. David who's in his 20s, and this covers, scholars differ with it, this ending here of this part of his life, anywhere from 5 to 10 years of his life on the run from Saul, camping in different places, moving his mighty 600 men with him wherever he goes, this little band of people.
I think it's worth pointing out too, Saul, in a formal sense, he's king over Israel, over the 12 tribes of Israel, but he doesn't seem to be uniting the nation together. He's very much, he's very localized He's got his Benjamites around him. You know,
Yes.
I mean, they're the real loyal ones.
Yeah.
You get the picture that he is. He's quite distracted. He's not really, because there's a bit of a task in uniting the tribes together, and David does that.
And the other task that God has given him as the king is to finish, as we've pointed out in previous episodes, he has to finish what Joshua started.
Yeah.
This holy war.
Yeah.
To wipe out the other things. By the end of his life, Saul couldn't care less about any of this.
Well, because he's too busy trying to chase David.
Exactly.
And this is, and the major standing threat now to Israel's occupation of the land of the Philistines.
Yeah.
This is a group of sea peoples that have moved in. It's like the Vikings.
Yeah.
They've moved in and they're technologically advanced, as we've said before. They're among the first to use iron. Everyone else is using bronze.
Yes.
Okay, so they're quite superior in that sense. Saul is meant to be fighting the Philistines, but and because the Philistines are raiding Israel all the time. I mean, they're really suffering. He's running around with his 3,000 crack Benjamite troops and chasing David the whole time because he's so paranoid that David is conspiring against him, which it couldn't be further from the truth.
And and it seems like, and we'll get the picture here, that Saul is just continually putting out fires.
Yeah.
Like there's a little raid over here. We've got to run
that's
over
right.
here.
He's doing
There's a
that,
raid. We got to go. Yeah, he's a man of war who is now gripped with paranoia and fear and is totally distracted. So we'll see this is the final fall of Saul and the rise of David, even though David looks like he is on the run, persecuted,
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
distracted. No, God is with him.
Yeah, that's right.
In the midst of all of this.
This is like the story of Joseph. It's these repeated themes.
Yeah.
God makes a promise, and then against all adversity, the promise comes about.
Yeah.
That's the Bible, isn't it? Really, it's a story of the Bible. And for David, this difficult period is very much like the promise that Joseph had in his dreams, and then he's sold into slavery and he goes to prison, and finally he comes out on top. This is exactly what happens here. So this is really the message of this. I mean, Saul, the message of the book is brought out in the contrast between David and Saul. Saul is the proud man, the king like the other nations have. And you see what we see here is an absolute, a tyrant king who's really a madman, and he's paranoid, and that's very characteristic of the way it was
of those
in ancient kingdoms when you're trying to hold on to your rule. Whereas, David is something else, something quite unique.
Now, I love a chronological read through. One of the main reasons why I love a chronological read through is because they will often put the Psalms alongside the story of David, what's happening. Yeah. And I know it's not an exact science. It's not an exact science. Is there an online resource, a PDF or anything like that we could recommend to people or point to people, hey, as you're reading this, check out the Psalms that go alongside the story roughly? Anything off the top of your head?
Not off the top of my head. It is a very... Look, it's a very inexact science, but there are some, I think, that sit fairly neatly in some of those contexts.
Yeah.
The valuable thing, actually, about the Psalms is that you get to see the inner process of David.
Yeah.
He's not just calmly, I'm trusting in the Lord and I'm all calm and peaceful. No. His peace is on the other side of a lot of wrestling with God.
Definitely.
And I think it's great to see that because you realize that he struggles through this, but he does struggle with God in the sense of wrestling with God, to use the imagery from Jacob. And that's where his faith grows, and that's what brings him to this point of peace and confidence that we see, for example, in Psalm 27, which is a psalm probably written right in the middle of this.
Yeah, so I'm sure there's some resources out there. I'll get one approved by you or a couple approved by you. I'll throw it in the link of the show notes because if you've never done it, I encourage you to do it. It really does open up a lot more to the story. Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna kick into Psalm 23. This is on the heels.
1 Samuel 23.
Did I say Psalm? Sorry. It was,
Well, that's irrelevant. Imagine that in the middle of this.
Yes. But anyway,
he's in the valley of the shadow of death here.
I'm leave this. I've got Psalms in my mind now. 1 Samuel chapter 23, this comes on the heels of, meanwhile, Saul is over here, absolutely brutalizing his own people in paranoid fear.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, young David and his crew are basically becoming rulers in this little town of, is it Keilah?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Keilah there. And it's an amazing story of how he goes in and protects them.
Yeah, that's right. So, and I think the point is that David is doing, while Saul is busy chasing after David, David is already doing his kingly bit, protecting, the Israelites. And this is, during the harvest time, and because normally you wouldn't go to a threshing floor as a bit more of an outlying area, but they're taking the crops off the Israelites, and so David goes in and he saves the day.
It does the job, and it doesn't end well in 23. David's got a narrow escape because some local tribes are basically dobbing on him.
Yeah, that's right.
If you see something, say something to the government.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And they've done that, and Saul's hot in his trail. So his men then enter a period of time where they're basically living in the wilderness.
Yeah, it's interesting because the citizens of Keilah actually give David up. There's that point where Saul's looking for him, and David inquires of the Lord through Abiathar, the priest. He inquires, will the citizens of Keilah surrender me and my men to Saul? And the Lord said, they will. And so he leaves and he goes out into the wilderness. One
last important point about chapter 23. At the end of it there, Saul's hot on the trail. It's not looking good for David. What does God use to get, this is the point. God can use anything. Yeah. God uses the Philistines. The Philistines go attack something near Saul. Saul's like, right, I've got to go.
Yeah, that's right.
Put that fire out. David is saved by God moving the Philistine army.
Yeah, that's right. And so he's now really living in the wilderness. And for some of this he's living in caves, but there are around the Dead Sea area. There are all of these areas where that would have been quite defensible. And one of them, and this is probably one that's referred to in verse 23, verse 14, where it says he stayed in the wilderness strongholds and in the hills of the desert of Ziph. Yes. A very famous fortress there, of course, is the Masada fortress.
Yes.
And our listeners can just do a search on that. It's an amazing fortress. It was developed later by Herod, but it may well be that David and his men are using that hilltop. It's like a tabletop mountain, and it may well be that he's using Masada at that point.
We then go to 1 Samuel chapter 24, and we have two of these tales play out. It's funny how the pattern repeats, but this is the first story where David has an opportunity to literally kill Saul.
Yeah.
Delivered right into his hands, and David shows that he is more righteous.
Yeah, that's right.
More dependent on God because he spares Saul's life.
Yeah, he does. But there's a slight trip up here in the middle of this, and I think the importance of the two accounts, apart from the fact that they actually happened, is that David acts more honourably in the second than he does in the first. Now, we could easily miss this because he, so they're in the back of the cave. Imagine a cave with probably lots of different sections, right? Yes. And they're in. David and at least some of his men are in the back of one of these caves. And Saul goes in to relieve himself, and David creeps up to Saul and he cuts off the corner of his garment. Now, this is the royal robe. Okay, so. The symbolism of this, we could miss this, but it's actually David gets. He realized what he did after he did this, but by cutting off the royal robe, it signifies a sort of a taking of power in some sense. Yeah. There's a story of, I think it's Jeroboam and the prophet where he tears the robe.
Same with Saul and Samuel. When Saul grabs hold of Samuel and says, don't let it be, he tears the robe.
Yeah, that's right.
And Samuel prophesies, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a very symbolic gesture. And the other thing is, if he's cutting off the corner of the robe, he would have cut off the tassel on the corner of the robe. So he basically renders this robe non-compliant with the Torah.
Yes.
Because the rule for the Torah for the Israelites was that they have tassels on the bottom of their robes. So David is rendering Saul non-compliant with the law. And so in that sense, by symbolically voiding his kingship in that sense, he is, in that sense, lifting his hand against the Lord's anointed, right?
Yes.
So once he does this, he goes back, and David, even though we probably think this is not much, David immediately gets it. Yeah. And it says that he was, in verse 5, it says, afterward David was conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of the robe. And he said to his men, the Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, or lay my hand on him, for he is the anointed of the Lord, And so...
And we get this get this great speech from David.
Yeah.
You can see him coming out, and you can imagine down in the valley a little bit further, Saul and his men are ready to go, and out comes David out of the cave.
Yeah.
And it's like,
that's right.
This confession, confession of and a promise of what he does.
Yeah, so he does. He proves to Saul that by, he thereby does prove to Saul that he means him no harm. But I think the important thing for the writer of 1 Samuel here is the way that David responds, right? David is never depicted, and this is important, right? Because David is a kind of ideal figure in this story.
Yes.
That's not always the case. We have Samson and other characters, right, that aren't put forward as ideal. But David is something of an ideal, but not ideal because he's perfect.
No.
David is an ideal because of how he it's not because he's without sin. He's put up as an ideal because of how he responds when he does sin.
That's a great point.
And this is why this is emphasized so much in the text. This is why we get the space given to this speech. Because when David does realize that he has sinned, he's immediately repentant. He's conscience stricken. He's responsive to God. And that, the prophetic writer of this is saying that, oh, you exiles, because this is probably put together in the time of the exiles. Yeah. God knows that you're not perfect, right? That's not the most important thing is how you respond when you do sin. And David has used an example of that.
And it's also a beautiful example of when, even with the most awful tyrant like Saul trying to kill David and his men, bringing out this army, thousands against 600, when David confesses and David swears an oath and promises and, invokes, the Lord's name and all of this, the response from Saul is repentance. Even though it's short-lived, and again, I'm coming back as a prosecutor here, the defender.
Well, the prosecution is going to objection, Your Honour.
And we know where it's heading, but I'm going to say
he does admit though. He does have this moment. You're right. He has this moment of genuine admission.
He says, "May the Lord repay you with good for what you've done for me today. Now I know." This is Saul speaking. Now I know for certain that you will be king, and the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hand. Therefore, swear to me by the Lord that you will not cut off my descendants or wipe out my name from my father's family. So David swore to Saul, and they have a pact, short-lived. It might last for a year or so. We don't exactly know how long, but Saul goes back. David is allowed to prosper there and establish himself in the wilderness cities.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And we go from there. Now we get a really strange story in chapter 25. This is David, Nabal, and Abigail.
Yeah.
Now, summing it up is basically that these are foreigners in Israel. There's a very wealthy foreigner by the name of Nabal or Nabal, however you want to pronounce it, and he's a goose. He's an absolute idiot. Yeah. He's a bit of a loser. David comes to him and says, "Listen, could you give us a hand? Could you help out me and my men? We've looked after you. We've only ever protected you and your shepherds."
Yeah.
And he says,
which would have been needed in those times. Absolutely.
Yeah. There's a lot of raiders.
There's the Philistines around. Remember going nuts on the region, and David's doing his bit to
again, David's got this reputation of the guy who killed Goliath still.
Yeah.
So the Philistines are giving them a wide berth.
Yeah.
And going, okay. And even Nabal's people are saying, no, these guys were great. Whenever they were here, we were totally safe.
Yeah.
They never lifted a finger against us. They never took anything from us. But Nabal, being an absolute fool, being the goose that he is, gives David a whole mouthful, then goes back and throws a party for himself. And we have this incredibly wise, beautiful, amazing wife of this loser, Abigail, coming out and making peace with David.
Because, of course, when David sends his men to ask this question, and I mean, Nabal,
Yeah.
he just insults David.
Oh.
Quite terribly. And,
Yes.
and, this gets reported back to David, and David's like, right, put on your swords.
Yeah, put on your swords, let's go.
That's right. We're going in. But meanwhile, of course, Abigail, hears what the reply had been to David's men and rushes in to make things right.
Yes.
This is so she does this, and she's this honorable woman, and the idea, the idea here is, those who curse you, I will. It's kind of that. It's around that theme, and Abigail is the one who blesses, the one blesses the Lord's anointed and so forth. So it's kind of that theme here, but really, this is an interesting story because, David's strapping on his sword and going in, and that would have been wrong to do that. And what we see in this story,
he even swears an oath. He does like what Saul does. I swear an oath. May God, do something against me if I don't kill him today. Very similar. It's almost a bit of an echo of when Saul swears an oath. Like, if anybody touches food,
that's right.
It's a type of thing.
It
like
really
that.
echoes that. So he's, again, David's not the, he's not the held up an ideal here because he's without sin. It's how he responds. But also what we see in this is that it's actually God who delivers him from sinning in the first place.
Yeah.
It's like God, providentially, has Abigail there at the right time to step in and appease David. Yeah. And David realizes, you've saved me actually from doing something terrible.
Blessed is your discernment. Yeah. This is what David says to Abigail. Yep. Blessed is your discernment, and blessed are you today. Today you kept me from participating in bloodshed and avenging myself by my own hand.
Yeah, that's right.
That's, and he
because vengeance is mine, says the Lord. You don't do, so.
And it's a great lesson here because as the story goes on, Abigail goes home. Nabal or Nabal, however we're going to pronounce him there, is throwing this party. He's drunk, and she's like, "I just saved your life," and he's like, "Whatever, I don't care." The next morning, he gets up, has a seizure, falls over dead.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's basically, and David picks up on it straight away. God says, "Lord," he basically says,
"I've learnt my lesson. You're the one that avenges, not me."
He basically says that. David goes, it's like a light bulb moment for David. I don't have to avenge myself. God's going to do it for me.
Yeah.
I can really rest in him. And his next move is like, well, now that Abigail's...
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
That Abigail woman was beautiful and smart. Are you interested in getting married? And she's like, yeah, I'll definitely come and marry you.
Yeah, really important lesson here for David. And this is going to be directly reflected in the next chapter. So he's learned, and it's such a key... It's such a key thing in the Old Testament. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. Now, Paul quotes from that in chapter 12, but that's from Deuteronomy. Do not take vengeance. Do not take personal vengeance.
Yeah.
Because that's God's job. And so David is about to come in and take things into his own hands. And, we see all of those Psalms where David's praying against his enemy. It's him giving that over to God. It's relinquishing that position of judge.
Yes.
And giving that to God, and so that's going to be relevant to what happens in the next chapter, as I said.
Well, as we finish off chapter 25, little quick note here about David and his wives. So Saul had promised and given over, as we remember the story from last time. Michael, do you pronounce it Michael or?
Yeah, that'll do.
Michelle. It's not Michelle. It's
I thought I had all the names right, all of my biblical names right, and then when I went to Israel the first time, our Israeli guide would say these names, and who's that? I've never heard of that person. It's like, that's the guy in the Bible.
David, and it's like, who's that? What are you doing? Yeah. So David's first wife, which is Saul's daughter, Michal.
Yeah.
We find out that Saul had basically married her off to another person.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So David's lost that. David has married another woman. So he's now his second wife, Ahinoam of Jezreel, and then he adds Abigail to his thing. So he's got his first wife has been taken off him.
Yeah.
Then he's got these two wives in the wilderness period with him as a young man. Now, you just said that David's not presented as perfect. David having these multiple wives.
Yeah, throughout the Old Testament, That appears to be the normal. We know it's interesting because we know all along that it's not the ideal.
Yes.
From Genesis, very clear that it's not the ideal, and yet it's an allowance. And this very important kind of ethical principle is that when the situation already is kind of messy, and because this is a warring society, men went off and were often killed in battle, and the only security for the women in those times was to be married, and so polygamy was like this compromise. It wasn't ideally what God wanted, but it was this compromise, and so we see that. Now it can go too far. Once we get to Solomon, we're going to see that this goes a little bit too far in that case.
It definitely goes too far there. And Matthew, now we get to chapter 26, chapter 26 of 1 Samuel, and we get a repetition of this, the story of David having an opportunity to kill Saul and sparing him.
That's right.
Different to the first time. This is this is a bit of a night moves.
Yeah.
A bit of an operation here, a bit of a stealth operation.
So he does a bit of a scout with some of his men to check out where Saul is camped. They're at night.
Yep.
For some reason, David decides to go down into the camp at night. We're not told why.
And he's taken Abishai.
Yeah.
So we now
Job.
we now get these. We're starting to get what can you say? Families and men and their descendants who are going to be important players in the life of David.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Joab.
Yeah.
Which is one of David's right-hand men and his family.
Yeah.
And on the other side we have Saul's cousin Abner.
Yeah.
Who is the leader of his army, and we've seen him before.
Yeah.
He was there with David and Goliath all the way through, and Abner will become an important player as the story of David goes on. But he's there. He is Saul's right-hand man when it comes to all things military.
That's right, and they're all asleep. In fact, we're told later that the Lord puts them into a deep sleep.
Yes.
So David goes right down into the camp, and there they are sleeping, and his spear, and Saul's there on the ground, his spear and his water bottle are there, and Abishai says, "This is it. This is the moment." In verse 8 of chapter 26, Abishai said to David, "Today God has delivered your enemy into your hands. Now let me pin him to the ground with one thrust of the spear. I won't strike him twice." Now, what David's reply is important in the light of what he had learnt in the case of Nabal. Yeah. Okay, and in the previous incident when he cut the robe, okay? Yes. So he's learned a couple of really important lessons. He says, "Don't destroy him. Who can lay a hand on the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? As surely as the Lord lives," he said, "the Lord himself will strike him, or his time will come and he will die, or he will go into battle and perish." So, that had just happened to Nabal. The Lord sorted that out. Yeah. But the Lord forbid that I should lay a hand on the Lord's anointed. Now get the spear and the water jug and let's go. So he's going to take them so that he can prove again to Saul. I mean, Saul had already said, "I'm sorry," and yet now, he's still out pursuing David. So yet again, David's going to say, "Hey, listen, I had yet another chance to kill you and I didn't." That's why he takes the water jug. But, this is what we see here is that David isn't willing to take something that's not been given to him at that time. Even though he's been anointed as king, you feel like, man, surely, and even Abishai thinks, surely it's justified to kill Saul. He's come out against you again. Yeah. And David's saying, "No, I'm not going to take it unless the Lord gives it."
Yeah.
And we're going to do the right thing.
We're going to do the right way.
Yeah.
And I love this time. It even goes as far as this time when David has the opportunity to shout down and the men are woken up.
Yeah.
He doesn't go after Saul. He goes after Abner.
Yeah, that's right.
David goes after Abner. Now, Jewish tradition says that Abner was the best of the best, like a mighty man who could not be, brought down by other men. Like he was like this huge behemoth of a guy, an amazing military leader. Like that's the background there. And so you get this David shaming Abner, saying, "Look what happened. We were able to get in there and get that close. Yeah. You didn't protect, the Lord's anointed." Right. And Saul, again, at the end of this chapter, saying, "I've sinned. I am sorry.
Yeah, that's right.
Surely God's going to raise you up. Please don't forget me," that type of thing. And he goes back home again.
Yeah, that's right. Yep. And then, David goes out and actually David lives among the Philistines. This is like an exile for David now. He's living amongst the Philistines. Again, this story would have been significant. Again, this story comes together in its final form during the Babylonian exile. And so just as David lived among the Philistines, the Israelites after 600 BC were living in Babylon. And so, so David is living amongst the Philistines, but he's always doing the right thing, isn't he, throughout this period?
Let's take a quick break, and we'll get David in exile next here on Thrive Deeper. Hey there, Thrive family. It's your old mate DJ Payne here, and I am so excited to be letting you know about our current listeners special offer. I think this might be close to the final moments that you can get it. The listeners special offer, and I'm saying that this is the best one that we have ever offered to you. It is the Signature Classics, a 7-volume set of C.S. Lewis. That's right, we've got in the box, in this beautiful slipcase, Mere Christianity, the Screwtape Letters, Surprised by Joy, The Four Loves, The Problem of Pain, The Great Divorce, and Miracles. Each one of these books are absolutely phenomenal by a person that I think is one of the most influential Christians ever in the last 100 years. So in between recording episodes of Thrive, I sat down with our very own Matt Jacoby. I handed him one of C.S. Lewis's books, and this is the conversation that took place. One of my favourites has got to be, and one of his most famous books. It's been turned into theatrical plays. It's been turned into a comic book. It's been turned into all these different...
It's been turned into a comic book.
There's all these different spin-off things.
You would know.
I would. Maybe that's the next thing we have on offer, the comic book of the Screwtape Letters.
Yeah. It's essentially a working out, I think it's, in the New Testament it says we're not unaware of the devil's schemes, and it's the outworking of that.
Yeah.
It's like, here's I think what C.S. Lewis is doing, it's a very creative attempt to give us an insight into the wiliness and the schemes of the devil against us so that we can be wiser for it. So it's a wonderful example of how a piece of creative writing, and C.S. Lewis is such a creative writer, how he creates something that actually is very enriching. So I highly recommend it. It's a good read.
The complete C.S. Lewis Signature Classics, a 7-volume set. This is your special Thrive Today offer for Christmas. Usually I've seen this beautiful set advertised for $100, $90, even more online. We are offering it to you for $72. That's right, $72, and this complete set can be all yours. It is for Australia only, so I'm sorry, international listeners, maybe next time. If you're looking at a stocking stuffer, if you're looking for that special present for that person at work, trust me, this is an amazing offer you're not going to get again. So head over to thrivetoday.tv, click on Listeners Special Offer, and that will take you over to the complete C.S. Lewis Signature Classics. 7 books, $72. You couldn't go wrong with that. Now, let's get back into Thrive Deeper. You're on Thrive Deeper. We're in the end of the book of 1 Samuel. We're up to 1 Samuel chapter 27. It's DJ and Matthew here. David, the young David, he's in his mid to late 20s at this stage. He's got a couple of wives and 600 men with him, a growing family, and he's learning these incredibly practical lessons that God is going to fight for him.
Yeah, that's right.
God is going to take vengeance for him, and he just has to trust. He's now in Ziklag, which is with the Philistines.
Yeah, that's right. So he's been given this town, and he says to the Philistine king, the king asks him, have you been out raiding? And actually he's been raiding Philistine. So again, the point is that he's still fighting for Israel, even though he lies to the Philistine king and says, I've been raiding the towns of Judah. Yeah. The point is that David, while Saul is, again, not doing his job, David is the one doing the work here, behind the scenes.
But he's also made peace with these Philistine guys in Ziklag, and he lives there with his crew for 1 year and 4 months.
Yeah, that's right.
So this is, again, we sort of skip over this. There's a lot of time passing here, and, there's some, peace there with David and this.
But this gets to a sticky moment because it gets to the point where the Philistines decide, right, we're going to wipe Israel out, okay? Yeah. Now, David is... in their eyes, David has become a Philistine. Yes. So, and he's quite the man of war as well. He's got the reputation, right? So Achish says to David, "You must understand. This is chapter 28. You and your men will accompany me in the army." Now, this is a sticky situation for David because...
You've jumped over to chapter 29, I think.
No, 28. In those days, the Philistines gathered their forces to fight against Israel.
Oh, yeah, sorry, at the beginning.
Achish said to David, "You must understand that you and your men will accompany me in the army." So this is and David says nervously, not, realizing he's in a really sticky situation now. Yeah. He says, "Then you will see for yourself what your servant can do." It's very, very ambiguous reply, right? So... The question is, okay, how is he going to get out of this one?
Yeah, and the king here in Ziklag trusts him so much that he appoints David as his personal bodyguard.
Yeah, that's right.
He says, right, you and your crew, you're so good at what you do. You're now my bodyguard here. We're going to go out and do this.
And the thing is, we get this break. This is interesting, the sequence, because you're left hanging, right? This is a cliffhanger right here because you're thinking, what? How is this going to, David's going to go out. We know that he doesn't want to fight against Israel, right? That the last section has just proved that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the last thing he wants to do. But now he's in the Philistine army, and we get a stop, right?
Yeah, we get a meanwhile.
Over in So what is Saul doing, right? Yeah. Because the thing is, how is David going to get out of his problem? Well, before that's answered, we go to Saul. Well, Saul
is in another problem.
He's in the same situation. The Philistines are drawn up. Well, how is Saul going to deal with his problem? And
we get a reminder here that a couple of chapters ago, we didn't even mention it, Samuel has passed away. And it's sort of just mentioned in passing.
Yeah.
By the way, Samuel's dead.
That's right.
He's, taken up to his, hometown, and
yeah,
Israel mourns for him and everything like that. Now, we're reminded of that because Saul can't reach out to Samuel.
Yeah.
He has no Samuel there. He doesn't have a priest with him anymore, doesn't have the ephod, doesn't have anything there. So Samuel goes against the very thing. So Saul goes against the very thing that he was successful at the beginning of his reign.
Yeah.
Getting rid of the spiritualists, the witches, the mediums out of Israel. Saul was responsible for helping make that happen at the beginning of the kingdom. Now, towards the end of his reign, he's like, let's see if we can find one of those witches to come and help us.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Which
is
he's
got, well he wants to, he wants to talk to Samuel.
Yeah.
But he's willing to do this terrible thing. I mean, this was really the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah.
In Deuteronomy, it's just again and again. You never ever do this. Mediums and spiritists and
you're not even allowed to allow them to live in your land. If you find one, they're to be disowned.
Yeah.
It's pretty heavy consequences for anybody doing this. And it's important to point out because it's mentioned a couple of times. the way that God communicated with Saul and presumably with David as well was either through dreams and visions, directly to them in dreams and visions, through the priest and the ephod and we don't really understand exactly what happened there. That's a mystery to us, or direct, or prophets coming in and directly doing that.
Yeah.
Saul has got none.
No, he's got none.
He's got none in his camp, which says so much.
Yeah, that's right.
About how God has totally left him.
That's right. Yeah. So he goes and visits this witch,
the witch of Endor.
Yeah.
The witch. Which is this crazy story. Basically, Saul disguises himself. Some of his men have said, "Look, we found this witch in Endor, this medium." He goes, right, he disguises himself, goes in there and says, listen, I need to, find this person. And before anything goes on, before she even have time to cast a spell, out of the ground comes the spirit of Samuel. And she freaks out. She can see him. Saul doesn't really see him.
Yeah, we're not told what she does. Presumably presumably something happens.
Yeah.
And actually, she sees a ghostly figure coming up from the earth, which she describes as an old man wearing a robe.
But immediately, as soon as that happens, as soon as he said, I want to meet Samuel, Samuel appears, and straight away she knows that this is Saul.
Yeah.
So there's something
there's something going on
There's something spiritual going on here.
So, the big question that people ask is this Samuel? Is this a ghost? Is this a ghost story, or what do you think?
I think from the text, this is a miracle.
Yeah.
God performs a miracle. That I believe in. Again, people, we're not told clearly exactly what happens with Old Testament saints, as we call them, or those who are saved or godly in the Old Testament period. But we know they go to the place of the dead. Yeah. And they're at peace in some sort of peaceful way, waiting for the time that they will be taken, by Jesus, into the next dimension or reality, whatever you want to call it there. And we know that according to Scripture and what God has laid out, no one comes back and says anything to anybody. And I believe this is a miracle. I believe that God brings Samuel back up, and this is literally Samuel talking to Saul and judging the living daylights out of him, and really telling him what's what. And this, it's a miracle by God.
Yeah, yeah. So Samuel, you're right in that we don't get a lot of explanation about where do the dead go. It's just the word Sheol is used throughout the Old Testament. But that sits. That's just the realm of the dead generally. But they what we find out in the New Testament is you get more details. What we find out is the New Testament is that there is this spiritual intermediate state that believers, Old and New Testament, go to await the resurrection, of course.
Yeah.
And so what's interesting about this, not only this, but think, for example, of the Transfiguration, where Jesus is speaking to Moses and Elijah. So this isn't the only time where an Old Testament saint appears to earthly characters. We have that in the Transfiguration as well. So so I think I don't think we need to doubt that this is really Samuel. The ghost of Samuel, the spirit of Samuel.
It's Samuel.
Yeah, it's Samuel. In some sense.
In a non-physical form. If that makes sense.
That's right. Yeah,
in a whatever you want to call it, in a ghostly form, he's able to rise here.
And it's bad news, isn't it? I don't know what Saul was expecting, but basically Samuel says tomorrow you and your sons are going to die.
It's the conversation between the two is absolutely terrifying, but also I find it very humorous because of Samuel's opening line, "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up here?" Like that opening line. And Saul totally honestly saying, I am in serious trouble. I'm at the end of my tether. Like everything, God is not speaking to me. You're not here. Nothing's going on. And Samuel basically says, dum-dum, I told you exactly what was going to happen.
It's almost like, Samuel's in heaven and, Jesus says, look, you got to go back for a little while. You got to go back. I just for a few minutes. I don't know, but whatever happens there,
but it's important. This is an important point.
Message.
The last message from Samuel to him is basically David is going to be the king. You're going to be handed over to the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons will be with me, as in the land of the place of the dead, and the Lord will hand Israel's army over to the Philistines. At that, Samuel's gone.
Yeah.
Saul lies down as if he's dead.
Yeah.
He's like comatose, like terrified.
Yeah.
And we have another picture of the one who does good in all of this is the witch of Endor, who then is like, he's got to eat. Like, let's feed him.
That's right. She looks after him.
She looks after him there. It's an amazing story.
Right. And then we flick back to the scene that we were left with, the cliffhanger. How is, what's going to happen?
The bigger Philistine commanders from all around come to him.
They come to the king, Achish, and they say, listen, we just can't trust this David guy. We're not willing to go into battle with him.
They basically go, Achish, king of Ziklag, have you not heard the number one hit? Saul has killed his thousands, but David his tens of thousands.
And that'd be Philistines as well.
We all know that song. What the heck are you doing with David? And
they may, because remember, David has been raiding Philistine towns.
Yeah.
So some of these guys may be aware at least of rumors that have gone around, about David doing this. So they're thinking, no, this guy...
they're not trusting.
He's not for us. He's for Israel.
But again, and we know that David is for Israel, and I don't know the relationship he had with Achish there, but Achish says, "Listen, I've got to let you go."
Yeah.
David's like, what have I done? He actually protests, and he has a beautiful line here. The king, one of the Philistine kings here, says, "I'm convinced that you've been as good to me as an angel of God."
Yeah.
You've been my own personal angel of God here.
Yeah.
So David is totally, without even raising a sword, let go.
Yeah, that's right.
And free to move away.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
it's amazing. So we go into a quick story here. He
goes back. He heads back. Then he's like, "Okay, we're sending you home." Heads back to Ziklag, only to find that the town has been raided by the
Amalekites.
Right now, remember these are the guys that Saul should have. Got rid of completely, but didn't. And now David is having his Amalekite confrontation. They have raided the town, plundered the town, and taken their wives and children of David and his men.
Yeah.
And so they get back and they're crying and they go in pursuit.
It looks sketchy here for David for a second because when they get back, husband, wives, children, everything is gone, and David's men... you've got to think. These guys have been loyal. They've been living in the Philistine army. And so this gives us the picture of going, okay, David's in hiding, running around with these people, doing all these different stuff. They've based themselves in Ziklag there. The family there, while they've gone for days or weeks or whatever dealing with this thing.
Yeah.
While that's happened, the Amalekites have come, taken everyone away. He's basically, his men are like...
Yeah, this is close to mutiny.
Yeah, we've been running around with you for years now.
And I think they would have had they would have been questioning, because David, of course, went with the Philistines, to go into battle, you don't quite know how he's going to get out of it. That's the cliffhanger. But can you imagine what David's men were thinking about this? We're not going to go and fight against Israel. Yeah. It's like pack your bags where, it's right up to that last minute moment where basically, and I think this is the point of the text, God does something again to prevent David from wrongdoing.
Yeah.
But his men don't know, he's really been pushing it with them. Yeah. So finally they get to come back. There's relief there, but when they come back, the town's been raided. And these guys aren't happy.
Yeah, and they're saying, hey, maybe it's time for David to go. Maybe this is it. David finds strength in the Lord. They bring back. He's got his priests with him there, Abiathar, and they bring the ephod. They start questioning what should they do, and he basically rallies the troops.
Yeah.
And says, look, God is with us. We're going to pursue them and we're going to get everything back. And at the right moment, just at the right moment, they see this Egyptian kid wandering around, half dead. And they're like, hang on, this kid was with the Philistines here, this Egyptian guy. They grab him. He spills the beans, lets know everything what they want to do. They swear safety to him.
Yeah.
And off they go and they have an amazing victory.
Yeah.
over the Amalekites,
Yeah.
Totally plundering everything and, more importantly, bringing back their wives, their children, their possessions, everything back to themselves.
Yeah. And he makes a really important ruling here.
Yeah.
Because some of the men not all of the men go out to retrieve the plunder.
Yeah. Some of them stay back.
Yeah, some of them stay
because
back.
I mean the town has been ransacked.
Yeah.
Unless these Amalekites come back again, we got to leave some guys here.
Yeah.
And maybe some of them were just so depressed and downtrodden that they weren't going to go.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So when they come back, the ones that did go out and recapture all this plunder, they say, "Well, we're not going to share with those guys that stayed back home."
Well, so he takes so I'm just reading it again. Takes 400, leaves 200, and basically says the 200 who were left were exhausted.
Yeah, that's right.
Miserable.
Yeah.
We're not going. We're going to stay here and look after the camp.
And so the 400 guys that do go out, so we're not going to share with those guys. And David makes this ruling, and I think it's a ruling that's and this is the point, it's so much in the spirit of the Torah, this solidarity. Yes, they do the fighting, but when we come back, no, we're going to share the plunder because it's the Lord who gave them into our hands. It's God who fought for us. This is a gift of God, and we're going to therefore share it. And that's such an important principle in the Torah, this idea that God has given you the land, that God has enabled you to have this wealth.
Yeah.
And so God expected them to share and
equally.
distribute that evenly.
Yeah.
So, what we see here is David, the law-abiding king.
Yes.
Here we see David's character.
And even establishing, the law in a better way, like clarifying it here.
Yeah, so it's like the wise ruling of David here.
And he also does one last thing. Out of all the spoils that they bring back, he then sends out a share to every town, every king, every ruler, every tribe that he was able to take solace in him and his men over these years of wandering. Yeah. He sends them back and says, "Listen, this is what the Lord has given us. Yeah. Thank you. You looked after me. You deserve part of this as well."
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
so it's a great here.
Yeah, so they get back their stuff and more.
Yeah,
and way more, and that is important because equips. This is the providence in this. They get raided. That seems like a disaster, and yet they come back through this richer than they were before, and they have these gifts to give, which I think is at an important moment, because what we're going to see in the next chapter, of course, is that
the opposite.
The Saul's dynasty, in effect, is cut off.
Well, it's again, as you love to point out, Matthew, this book is a book of contrasts. So we leave the final thing we read in 1 Samuel about David is establishing himself.
Yeah,
great reputation, honourable, fair. The people are loving what David is doing. David is giving glory to God. Now, let's go over again. Let's go to Saul, and the Philistines are fighting against Israel. Yeah. David's nowhere to be seen. David's doing his thing over there. Yeah. This is meanwhile back with Saul and his army. They are fighting against the Philistines. Saul, Jonathan, Jonathan's other brothers, Saul's other sons, all fighting against. And it's not going well at all. Finally, it's exactly as Samuel prophesied.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so they're losing in battle. Looks like Saul's realised that in any moment he's going to be killed. He says to his armor bearer, "Listen, run me through. Yeah. We're done." I mean, he's probably wounded.
He's already wounded by the arrows. He's got a few arrows through.
Run me through. But of course, the armor bearer refused to do this, and Saul takes his own life. And I think there's something about the way that this happens. This is because Saul killed Saul. I think
it's great.
This is what happens. It was Saul that killed Saul's chances at kingship. It was Saul that sabotaged Saul's monarchy. It was Saul that constantly is working against himself. And we see that the end is indicative of the life, at least to his kingship.
Yeah. And so the towns around there, all the Israelites flee.
Yeah.
They see what's happened. Saul and his men and his sons are dead. Yeah. His own armor bearer falls on the sword alongside with Saul. And so the next day the Philistines come up and they find Saul and his 3 sons dead at Mount Gilboa. They cut off Saul's head, stripped off his armor, and sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to spread the good news in the temples of their idols and among the people.
Yeah.
And they put his armor in the temple of the Ashtoreth and hung his body on the wall of Bethshan. And the residents of everybody journeyed all night. They were, basically, the Philistines are partying, and the Jabesh Gilead Israelites are distraught and do the right thing and travel to bring back
that's right.
remains.
They do the honourable thing. And David does too, and I mean, we'll talk about this more next week, but and this is important. David, when he hears about this, because of course a man from Saul's camp, thinks, oh, I'll be the one to tell David this is great. And he runs out and the upshot of this, he thinks that David's going to be stoked and gloat, but no, actually we see David goes through a mourning process. He refuses to gloat over this. David's not the one grasping for the kingdom here.
No.
It's been given to him as a gift.
But it's also important to remember that Saul and Samuel. It's also important to remember that Saul and David were father-in-law, son-in-law. Jonathan was his best friend. David lived in the house with Saul, lived in the king, in the mansion, in the royal palace with Saul. There was a tight relationship. They called each other father and son. There was a love and affection for one another there. As bad as it got.
In the early days.
But David seems to be. This is again. Now that Saul's dead.
Right.
Now that Saul's dead, I can put my defendant hat aside and say, listen, I leave Saul over there, we know what came of him. But the reason why I'm sticking up for Saul, the reason why I defend Saul is because I believe that David would.
Yeah.
Because David does.
Good,
and David continually, all the way through, speaks of the good things of Saul and praises up Saul, even though Saul is cut off. It's there's a beautiful relationship there where David is almost like choosing to remember the good things.
Yeah.
If you know what I mean.
That's right. Yeah. And again, the text here is, it's emphasizing, what it's emphasizing the right response to this. David isn't bent on vengeance and revenge and gloating and grasping for power. He's a humble. Remember, at the beginning, he didn't feel even worthy to marry Saul's daughter. And so throughout this, David shows his character, and that I think is what we're meant to be seeing here. This is what faith looks like, and it's so countercultural with the normal state of things when people are climbing ladders and grasping for power. But David he's not playing that game. David has learnt to trust in God, and we see that. We see that here.
Yeah. So as we go through, and we're wrapping up. Okay, so we've done well. 9 chapters, Matt. We've covered 9 chapters.
Yeah.
We've got to the end of 1 Samuel here, and we've got the death of Saul. So this leaves the field wide open for David to take on, and that's where the next part of the story will go. Applying these lessons to our life today. We're not kings. We're not running around. We're not being persecuted by other people. There's not all these crazy battles and wars and everything that we're fighting. How do we apply these lessons that David is learning to our own life?
Yeah, the way I've often phrased this is, by saying, don't play God. It's such a different way of living. The life of faith is so fundamentally different. And what David exemplifies is the life of faith. As imperfect as he is, he does exemplify a growing faith. And as I said, we have the privilege of having the Psalms where we see on the inside what that process of faith and trusting in God and the struggle for that. It's not like David's not saying, oh, no, everything's, everything's just going to be okay. He's not just saying positive things and, what do they call that? Manifesting positivity.
He's not exercising the secret or...
Yeah, that's right. He's because what we see in his prayers is that he's lamenting and crying out to God and but faith is doing something, and faith is appealing to the promise. But God, you said that you would deliver me, and I'm still in this situation. So there's lots of struggles. Yeah. But his faith is growing and learning to trust God in those struggles. And he does. He's a man of faith. And as a result, he becomes king, and he wins the kingdom, and he completes the conquest, not because he's the man of war like Saul, but because he's the man of faith.
Yeah.
And I think this is where the text is holding up David as this ideal, because the righteous will live by faith. And David, was reckoned as righteous not because he was perfect, but because he lived by faith, because he had faith in God. And so God delivered him and established him, and for generation, the promise that God makes to David is going to last for generations. Why? Because David has faith.
All right. Enough of the funny messages. I've had a few funny texts and messages from people making fun of me because of my love of King Saul. All of a sudden, I've become a Saul defender. I don't know, it's just because I see something of myself in him, and the journey that I'm on, I'm wanting to become more like King David than I am like King Saul. Hopefully you've enjoyed 1 Samuel as much as I have, and God has spoken to your heart as well. But you can stop those King Saul messages now. He's gone, all right? Don't forget the special offer that we've got with C.S. Lewis Books. You do not want to miss out. Get in touch with us now. Stocks are limited. In fact, you might be too late. So message us now and find out if it is still available. Okay, until next fortnight, it's been DJ Payne. On behalf of the gang, we say thank you for downloading and supporting Thrive.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Thrive Deeper. Matthew and DJ really appreciate the questions and thoughts about what you're reading in the Bible as you go through it with Thrive. Our home on the internet is thrivetoday.tv. You can contact us, ask questions, see all of our resources and much more at our website, thrivetoday.tv. The Thrive Today network is on Facebook. Our Facebook page and links to our community groups are waiting for you. Just search and like Thrive Today page in Facebook now. Visit ratethispodcast.com/thrivedeeper. If you appreciate what we do and want to help us reach more people, go to ratethispodcast.com/thrivedeeper. Until next time, our prayer is that these shows will inspire you to go deeper into God's Word and thrive. This was another DJP.FM production.